Well, hello everybody. Pastor Randy here. Great to be back with you here at Making It Simple. I hope you're all doing great. Certainly have missed being with you, but a few days off of rest and a little relaxation and just spending some time in God's beauty up in the mountains. Well, I would say it was just what the doctor ordered, but I don't go to the doctor, so it was exactly what I needed, just to spend that little bit of time with the Lord up by a mountain stream. It was a powerful thing and a wonderful time together. We left off in the introduction last week with a message called God is not the problem. And let me share with you, during my time away, that message became even more evident. Just that little bit of time of just communion with the Lord, uh, and just being observant of the things going on around us. Friends, God is not the problem. We took our message from the book of Isaiah. What I want us to do today is we'll begin to look at this. We're going to break this down a little bit over the next few days, looking at the components of this, of why that statement, while it sounds bold, uh, it's just true. Clearly, Scripture makes it unquestionable that God doesn't change. God remains the same from the beginning and will be until the end. The old saying, and even Scripture says, the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. As the writer here begins, he says, look, listen. God's arm is not amputated. He can still save. I want us to think about that today. Maybe you've known someone who's lost a limb. Maybe you've known someone who's had some type of paralysis take place and they're no longer able to use that limb, be it arm, be it leg, whatever the case. When we think of something being hindered, in other words, the ability to maintain the strength, the ability to perform a certain act or whatever is no longer there. There's no one-legged basketball players, and there's no one-armed wallpaper hangers. And I'm not trying to be funny, but here's my point. When we think of being hindered in our life, it generally is something has created a change. Change is one of those words that is continually evolving, and that would be a proper place to put that word, because change has become one of those words that is constantly being used in different contexts. Change can be everything from coins in your pocket to changing your shirt to changing your hairstyle. And now it's moved into even changing what you are. I mean, there are people trying to be animals, and there's people trying to be the opposite of what God created them to be, and we change attitudes and we change perspectives, and that word is intertwined into our speech pattern. It's just always there. But the one constant that remains is God doesn't change. God is God. God is love. God is who He says He is, and that does not change. That's the one great consistency we can have in this life, friends. We live in an ever-changing world. We serve a never-changing God. And when we understand that, and we understand this first part, God has not lost the ability to save. So many around us are struggling to find answers. So many of us are struggling to find our way. Those around us that we see that are at best treading water, not swimming, the 100-meter swim or whatever. And I'm not up to date on some of those things, but My point is, there are many that are just floundering. They're just not able to find the answer. But God's not the problem. We, in the process of change, we have created so many alternatives. We have created so many different avenues, if you will, of finding joy, of finding peace, of finding happiness, all to realize that they all end up in the same place. Not what you was hoping it would be. We've all been guilty of that. We've all been victims of that to a degree. I certainly have, just within the last couple of years, thinking one complete direction. This is it. It is the way to go. It is the answer. Only to find out it was not. And found out the hard way that it was not. See, friends, when we place our faith or our belief in anything outside of the realm of God, it is always, as I used to promote wrestling shows, and many others obviously did as well, but there was one commonality in all of the posters that would go out. And this would even be true for other promotions as well, for other events. But it would say at the bottom of that card subject to change. In other words, it may not go the way that it's laid out here. It may not, those who are listed here may not appear. Oftentimes our plans in life are just that. They don't always go the way that we wanted them to, or the direction we wanted them to. That can lead to a lot of different things. Anger, sadness, bitterness, depression, and everything else that we can wrestle with. But the consistency within that is God didn't change. God wasn't the problem. He never is. The ability and the willingness to hear are what gets us the fulfillment that we're looking for. You see, God lays it out before us. And we see in this first verse, He can still save. When we think of that word save, we think of danger. We think of being rescued. Well, that's exactly what it means. Eternity without Christ. Eternity without settling our account with God. Eternity without being in that place of peace with God. That's a serious, serious issue, friends, that I don't think is taken serious enough in the world today. Many, and again, it's not being morbid. It's not about putting death at the forefront of our conversation, saying, oh, everything is... It's not about everything is terrible. It's not about everything is on the way to the end. It's about, am I ready? Because the clarity of Scripture, and even if one is out there, maybe one even by chance listening to this, and says, well, I'm not a person of faith, I don't believe this or that. Well, okay, but the one thing that we can agree on, regardless of whether it be Scripture or our relationship with Christ, death is real. It comes. We can argue or debate over what's next, but here's the point. Do you know? Has that been settled? Are you sure? Because God's ability to save is still available right now. For those who reject that, He loves you enough to let you do that. For those who say, I'm looking for the answer, He's given it in the person of Christ. What we have to determine in the concept of God not being the problem is, am I willing to receive the answer that has been provided for me? Or am I determined to continue to look for an alternative because that doesn't really work for me? You see the problem there? It's always the one looking back at you from the mirror. When we realize that that person, he or she, they often place us in situations that aren't the best. They often place us in situations that aren't the ending that we're looking for. God's not the problem. We have to be willing to listen. But in order to be able to listen, we have first have had the opportunity to hear. When we hear the message, when we hear the instruction, when we hear the command of God, we have a responsibility. We have an opportunity to either say yes or no. But understanding that with either of those answers comes different endings. I'm not talking about achieving perfection, and I'm not talking about achieving the opportunity to escape something, if you will. Scripture says that it rains on the just and the unjust. There are times that difficult moments are going to come our way. I call them learning moments. And they're not always fun. Sometimes they're indeed painful because we don't know why these things come. But there's a purpose there. And I can assure you, and we'll continue to look through this tomorrow, Lord willing, it's not God that's the problem. It's our unwillingness to change for the better. We want to change with the world. We want to evolve as time goes by with this and with that. But if we look at and if we use the word evolution and not changing from one thing to another, but with time, friends, we're living in maybe the greatest technological age ever. We see more gadgets and buttons and zips and zooms than there's ever been. But there's less communication between people than there's ever been. People don't talk to each other anymore. They type at each other. They criticize each other hidden behind a keyboard somewhere. But nobody talks to each other. But I assure you of this. God's not the problem. He's still speaking clearly and loudly. Just sadly that not enough people are listening. I pray that something through this message will touch a heart. I pray that something through this series of lessons over these next couple of days will help turn many, in fact, in a different direction to realize God's not the problem. He's just trying to save me. God bless you. Lord willing, I'll see you tomorrow.